Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. A while ago, I was asking myself, what is the one Latin American author or the one novel book that I have not read that I need to read? And my answer to that was Isabel Allende, and in particular, La Casa de los Espíritus, or The House of the Spirits. Now, the question here is, Jorge, why had you not read this author before? And I'm going to give you two reasons for that. The first one is that honestly, I got started a little bit late with Latin American literature. My first experience, my first conscious read of Latin American literature, without counting like the high school assignments and assigned readings and all those things, was 100 Years of Solitude. And I was already 20 years old by that time. So it's kind of hard to believe, but that's the way it happened. Maybe I can go back to this issue some other day and tell you why that happened. But after that, and this would be my main reason, is this, that in the academic world, or at least in the academic world as I experienced it, right, in my little academic island, there was a bit of a prejudice against Isabel Allende. People said that she was primarily an imitator of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So I guess a little bit of that prejudice kind of, I acquired it. And that was one of the reasons why I had not read her. But I told myself, okay, Jorge, you need to read this book. It's a classic. So many people have read it, so even if it is just to figure out whether you believe that she is just imitating Garcia Marquez or not, you have to read La Casa de los Espíritus. I finally have, and here I am just about to tell you a little bit about my experience with this book. So La Casa de los Espíritus was published in 1982. It was Isabel Allende's first novel, and it was just an immediate bestseller. So this was quite an event in the world of Latin American literature. It was marketed as an example, or as, kind of in the tradition of magical realism, as you probably know. And even though the Latin American boom by that time was a thing of the past, we're talking 1982, so this is postmodernism, the post-boom, as many people call it, it certainly did not hurt the fact that Gabriel Garcia Marquez had just received the Nobel Prize in Literature. So it was kind of like an added interest to Latin American literature, in particular to the kind of text that was in the magical realism type of vein. So genre-wise, and let me show you the copy of the edition in English that I consulted, which is from my library. Genre-wise, La Casa de los Espíritus is a good old family saga slash novel of the land, novela de la tierra, as we say in Spanish, with elements of fantasy, of course. But it is also a novelized history of Latin America. You can also read it like that. So we are definitely in Gabriel Garcia Marquez kind of territory. If you look at the English version, the one that I just showed you, this is 480 pages long, but I read this Spanish edition, which has an awful cover. I usually make it a point not to get the cover that shows you things from the film, but in this case it was the one they had, and I wanted to read it really badly, so I went with this one. This edition is only 384 pages in length, but they really packed a lot of text into each one of the pages, as tends to happen sometimes in Latin America and in other places. So to me, it was almost like anxiety inducing, when I'm like, wow, I've been on the same page for the last 20 minutes. I start to get nervous. I need to turn the pages, So if you look at a standard version in Spanish, not this one, it's just about 550 pages long. It has 14 chapters and an epilogue. So that's a little bit about, the context and the structure and all that. Setting, okay? You're going to realize that the word Chile does not appear in the novel at all, but it is obvious that the novel is set in Chile. There are hints throughout the novel, some of them very subtle, others not so subtle. For example, there's a character called the Poet with a capital P, and it is said at one point that he writes, or that he recites, songs of despair. So this is obviously Pablo Neruda, and the novel also bears an epigraph from one of the poems of Pablo Neruda. There's also, towards the end, when the dictatorship assumes power, the dictator, we are told, has an august mustache. And if you look at the original in Spanish, it says that he had Augustos Bigotes. And of course, Augustos, it's Augusto Pinochet, right? So you can make the connection right there with the dictator. So it is clear that we are talking about Chile, but obviously, you know, by leaving aside the specific place, by not mentioning a specific nation, what the novel achieves is a certain universality, at least in the context of Latin America, so that more people can relate to this story. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we explore why this novel, I believe, has been so popular and so successful. So, plot-wise, let me give you a quick overview because it really covers many generations. It's a family saga, after all. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the plot, and we'll see how this goes. La Casa de los Espíritus is the story of the Del Valle family. And we begin with the first generation that we hear about. They are well off, okay? They are powerful and they are involved in the country's politics. So they are really bourgeois, you could say. And the story begins sometime, I would say, in the late 19th century with a couple. We have Severo and Nivea, okay? And they have two daughters. One of them is named Rosa, and the other one is named Clara. And Clara is the one that we are really going to be following. It's the one that, she's the one that the novel focuses on, and also on her daughter. So Clara is a very important character, and she has supernatural powers, mostly telekinesis and clairvoyance. So Clara is clairvoyant. There's a play with words right there. She marries a guy named Esteban. Okay, and yes, it is Esteban. It's not Esteban, as they say in the movie, okay? It's just like in English, you know, Stephen Esteban. And this guy works in the mines, but eventually he becomes very powerful and becomes not only a landowner, but also an influential politician, okay? And by the time that that happens, that Esteban is powerful and in politics, we are talking kind of like of the 1920s. So we have advanced up to that point in history. So Clara and Esteban have 3 children. They have twins, okay, 2 boys, and they are named Jaime and Nicolas. And then most importantly, they have Blanca. Blanca falls in love with a laborer. His name is Pedro III because he is the son of Pedro II, who was the son of Pedro. Now, her father, of course, disapproves because remember, they are powerful, they are landowners, and Blanca all of a sudden falls in love with this guy, Pedro. So what happens is that she is virtually forced to marry a Frenchman. His name is Count Satigny. So that's a very important part of the story right here. Now remember, Blanca is in love with Pedro. So from their union is born a daughter, and her name is Alba. And you can see the significance of the names right here. We began with Nivea, Nivea as in nieve, as in snow. Then we have Clara, so clear. Then we have Blanca, white. And finally we have Alba. Alba is like the dawn, but Alba is from albus in Latin, which also means white. So you can see that all of the names of the female characters of the family have something to do with the color white, right? As in the purity and all that stuff. And of course, Isabel Allende is like really good at choosing the names of her characters. There's that other novel, Eva Luna. Okay, we can do like a whole video talking about only the significance of that name. So you can see that here too. Now, Alba falls in love with a guy called Miguel, and we are now in the second half of the 20th century by the time that this happens. So you can say, you know, 60s, 70s, etc. And Miguel is involved in politics, so Alba follows him. She's kind of like, you know, following the man that she loves. That's when, at one point, a socialist government is elected by the people, just as it happened in Chile. The conservatives are not happy, so what they do is that they support a coup d'etat with the help of the US, and that's how you have the military government, as tends to happen in the history of Latin America and in other places too. So at that point, you know, we're towards the end of the novel. What happens is that we follow the characters and the fates of the Del Valle family as their lives are affected by these historical events. There's something really interesting in this novel with the narrators. Okay, I'm going to use a plural here. The novel begins and ends with the act of writing. So that is something that I really like. There's that little element of meta fiction, right? It's a tiny element, I would say, but you have something similar in Don Quixote. You have it also there in Cien Años de Soledad, or 100 Years of Solitude. And what the narration does is that it alternates between third person and first person, but for the most part, I would say 90%, what you're going to have is third person narration. Now, the narrator tells us that he or she is using Clara's notebooks in order to put this story together. So we get the idea here that the novel is actually a text based on a previous text. It's an assembled text that is based on the stories that Clara writes. And the third person narration you're going to see is interrupted every now and then by Esteban's reflections from his own life in the first person. But it is only really in the epilogue. So it's only when you get to the very last part of the novel that this whole issue with the different narrators is clarified. So I don't want to give you too much information because it's supposed to be a kind of a revelation, I guess you would say. Regarding style, I was really astonished, by Allende's command of the Spanish language. It's just, astonishing. As I said, she has a very ample and very varied vocabulary, just like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So if you like language, if you like that type of, narrative style and all that, you're going to find a very, very good one in at least this work by Isabel Allende. I can't speak for the others. I'm sure they are also very good, but this is the only one that I have read so far. But not only that, it's not only a matter of knowing how to use the language and having an ample vocabulary. She also knows how to keep us turning the pages. For example, one thing that she will do, usually when she ends one of the sections, is that there are announcements of events to come. So that makes you want to keep reading because you're like, I want to find out how it is that so-and-so saved so-and-so's life at a later time, So that's something that is very well done. She almost follows, I would say, the style of the serial novel, right? That keeps you like with a cliffhanger and you want to know how it's going to continue. And also, this is also really nice. If you look at the chapters in this novel, they are titled, okay? And many of them, I would say most of them, I don't want to say all, but most of them can be read as individual short stories. So what you have here is kind of like a pearl necklace, right? In which each one of the pearls is a different thread, a different story that can be read individually. And of course, you can also enjoy it as a novel. I think the same thing has been said about 100 Years of Solitude, but my experience with this novel is that here you can see it even clearer because the chapters are titled, right? So that's what gives you that idea of different stories that make up a novel, just like those episodes that you had in 100 Years of Solitude, for example, the episode of the Ash Wednesday and stuff like that. But once again, here it's even more, obvious that that is the case. So the next thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to share with you some samples, okay, from the novel. I'm going to read them from the English translation. And the first one, what I did with this one was I just opened the novel at random and I picked a passage, okay? I have a friend who had a friend who's no longer with us, unfortunately, who said that is the way that you test whether a book is good. Just open it at random and read. I mean, I think there are some masterpieces that would not or might not pass the test. Especially I'm thinking maybe something by Dostoevsky, But in this case, it was really good because I went to page 201 and this is what I found. So let me read you this part and then we'll go into some of the reasons why I think this is good. Clara eluded me with that distracted attitude of hers I came to despise. I can't understand what it was about her that attracted me so much. She was a middle-aged woman without a trace of flirtatiousness, who walked with a slight shuffle and had lost that unwarranted gaiety that had made her so appealing in her youth. Clara was neither affectionate nor seductive with me. I'm convinced she didn't love me. There was no reason for me to desire her so outrageously and to let myself get so carried away by her refusal, but I couldn't help it. Her slightest gesture, her faint scent of fresh laundry and soap, the light in her eyes and the grace of her delicate neck crowned with untamable curls. I loved everything about her. Her fragility made me feel the most unbearable tenderness toward her. I wanted to protect her, to clasp her in my arms, to make her laugh like in the old days. I wanted to sleep with her beside me, her head on my shoulder, her legs tucked under mine, so small and warm, so vulnerable and precious, with her hand on my chest. At times I would decide I was going to punish her by feigning indifference, but after a few days I gave up, because she seemed more relaxed, when I ignored her. So this is a wonderful passage. I mean, you can see here the sense of attraction, right? The physicality, but also the passing of time, because there's this idea that she's not what she used to be, right? Because time has passed. And the next part that I have, the next passage that I chose is about, it's a description of carnal love. So there's more of that physicality, but also the great sense of passion that you find in this novel. So for this one, you have to go to page 174. And it says, he pulled her gently toward him and wrapped his arms around her. She pressed her face against the chest of this man she did not know, so different from the scrawny boy with whom she had exchanged such passionate caresses only months before. She inhaled his new scent, rubbed herself against his bristly skin, ran her hands over his lean, strong body, and felt a full, all-encompassing sense of peace that had nothing at all to do with the state of agitation that had taken possession of him. They sought each other with their tongues, as they always did, even though it seemed like a new invention, and fell kneeling as they kissed in desperation. Then they rolled onto the soft bed of damp earth. They were discovering each other for the first time, and there was no need for words. The moon crossed the whole horizon, but they did not see it. They were too busy exploring their deepest intimacy, insatiably entering each other's skins. Wow, right? I mean, yeah. And for the next one, we have on page 476. So this is in the epilogue, right? It's at the very end of the novel. This description of the strength of women. This is one of the major themes of the novel, so that's why I chose it to share with you. She was one of those stoical, practical women of our country, the kind of woman who has a child with every man who passes through her life, and on top of that, takes in other people's abandoned children, her own poor relatives, and anybody else who needs a mother, a sister, or an aunt. The kind of woman who's the pillar of many other lives, who raises her children to grow up and leave her, and lets her men leave too, without a word of reproach, because she has more pressing things to worry about. It was then I understood that the days of Colonel Garcia and all those like him are numbered, because they have not been able to destroy the spirit of these women. So these very strong women that push history forward, right? That is also another thing that I'm going to mention in a minute when we look at why this novel has been so successful. But before we do that, I did want to address the issue of magical realism. Of course, if we're going to talk about La Casa de los Espíritus, I think we have to say at least something about that. And I'm going to say that the magical realism in The House of the Spirits is not as pronounced as that, for example, of 100 Years of Solitude. And the only reason I compare this novel to 100 Years of Solitude is because Gabriel Garcia Marquez's most well-known novel is usually regarded as the epitome of this kind of mode, especially in Latin American literature. One of the characters, Clara's sister, Rosa, she is born with green hair. Okay, then we have Clara's powers. That's obvious right there. There are spirits in this novel, like literally. Okay, so yes, you do have those elements, but I would say that the magical realism of The House of the Spirits is kind of like a seasoning that is put there on the text. And I'll tell you even more. I think if La Casa de los Espíritus, if you just took away that element of magical realism from it, it would still be a compelling novel, and it would still be a great novel, even if those elements were erased from it. So that's what I wanted to say about this. But that said, leaving that aside, whether you take away these elements or not, the kind of fantasy that you hear or that you read about in this novel is just the same kind of thing that you would hear from maybe your grandmother if you had been born and had grown up in Latin America. It's nothing outrageous. It's the kind of thing that you would hear from previous generations. For example, I don't know, I knew this bad thing was going to happen because 2 weeks before, my brother, who is basically dead for 5 years, appeared to me and told me that this was going to happen. That kind of thing. That's what I'm talking about for the most part. Leaving aside, of course, the telekinesis and the clairvoyance would be also something that would fall into that category also. So that's what I have to say about the magical realism. Now, as I promised you, I wanted to answer a question, just offer my impressions on this, of course. Why is La Casa de los Espíritus, or why has it been so popular and so successful. And I'm going to share with you very briefly 4 points that I think contribute to this. The first one is that you get here with this novel a bestseller kind of story that is also very well narrated and clearly very well thought out before it was written. So what that means is that there are many levels of reading that at which the novel can be enjoyed. You can have the quote-unquote general reader, whatever that means. They can read this novel and enjoy it, and also you can have the academic, literary, whatever that means, type of reader, and they can enjoy it a lot too if they want to go into analysis and applying critical theory and all that kind of stuff. So that's number one. Number two is that I believe that with the House of the Spirits you get a female perspective, which is important in itself, but not only that, you get a female perspective that also understands men very deeply. As you know, the other way around is very difficult to find, but in this case, that's what you get, and that's one of the many reasons I think why this has been a very successful novel. Point number three. This is a story that is relatable, I would say unfortunately so, in all of Latin America. As I said before, it doesn't say Chile in any place, so it could have taken place almost in any Latin American country. Unfortunately, this whole thing with political turmoil, the fight between conservatives and liberals, and I'm using here the terms as we use them here in the US, and dictatorships, repression, torture, all that kind of stuff, right? So unfortunately, it is relatable throughout Latin America, and that is also something that, elevated it and that made it very, very popular and successful. And then number four, I would say, is this element of romance, of passion, of fantasy, right? This is the exoticization of Latin America. So of course that could be, criticized, but it just happens to be what it sells outside of Latin America, here in the US, maybe in Europe, right? Or at least it's what it sold, let's put it that way, back in the 1980s up to a certain point, maybe. But it's sort of like the literary equivalent of El Dorado. It's kind of like myth, this mythical land, Latin America as an exotic place. And that sells. That's one of the reasons why 100 Years of Solitude, this novel, have been so popular and have sold so much. So I want to share with you some thoughts on the film adaptation, which I watched a few days ago. It was released in 1993, so we're talking a little bit over 10 years after the publication of the novel. And it is directed by the Danish filmmaker Bille August. Okay, Pelle the Conqueror. Have you seen that movie? That's a wonderful movie, so I highly recommend that. This is a very good filmmaker. The film was not shot in Latin America. It was shot in Denmark and in Portugal, but they did a very, very good job in, recreating or creating Latin America, a filmic version of the continent. Now, the story has been condensed, okay? It tends to happen with these family sagas, and it focuses primarily on Blanca. So we see very little of the first generation in the novel, like Severo and Nivea, and we're going to focus more on Blanca. Actually, her daughter Alba, we just see her as a little kid, So many of the events that in the novel you're going to see happen in Alba's life, they have been translated or transferred to Blanca's experience. Blanca is played by Winona Ryder. Okay, so that's why the film you're going to see focuses mostly on her. And then Clara, of course, is Meryl Streep. You can see her here in the cover of this edition that I have of the book. Her husband, Esteban, main character, very important character, is Jeremy Irons, right? So we have a lot of talent right here, but the story has been condensed. And another thing about this is that Blanca's brothers, the twin brothers, Jaime and Nicolás, they're completely gone in the movie. So they really make sure that there was not going to be too much, and the movie is longish, it's 2 hours and something. So we already have a pretty long story right there. Another interesting thing about the adaptation is that much of the magical realism that you find in the novel, it just disappears, okay? To the point that I thought as I was watching the movie that the title of the movie, The House of the Spirits, is more figurative, than literal. In the novel, you have literal spirits. In the film, it's more like the spirits of the past, because of that element of magical realism that was, toned down. But remember what I told you, I believe that even if you take out the magical realism out of this novel, it's still a very good story, So it wasn't something from the movie that bothered me too much. The casting, of course, is problematic. Okay, I believe, from the main characters, the only one who is Hispanic is Antonio Banderas, who plays Pedro, the lover of, let me get this right, Blanca, okay, Winona Ryder, in the film. But, one thing that you have to think about is, yes, of course, we have tremendous talent here, but, the casting is problematic. But back in 1993, it wouldn't have been the scandal that it would be today. Let's say if Netflix decided to adapt this novel and they went with actors who were not Hispanic. It's still problematic, but back in 1993, not a huge scandal as it would be today. Bottom line, La Casa de los Espíritus, the House of the Spirits, is a must read. Okay, it's not just an imitation of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Did Isabel Allende, and yes, by the way, that's my Argentine accent, did she learn from Gabriel Garcia Marquez? Was she inspired by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, influenced by him? Definitely. Okay, no question about that. Just as William Faulkner was influenced by James Joyce, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez by William Faulkner, and Cormac McCarthy by William Faulkner too. It's not a problem. This happens. This is literature. Now, do I have any complaints about the House of the Spirits? Just for the sake of objectivity, let me share with you two things that I thought I would include as a kind of a complaint. I would say that even though the characters are complex, at times at least, they can seem a little bit stereotypical. Okay? You have the lustful, angry men and the magical women. You know what I'm saying? It's back to that exoticization of Latin America that I was telling you about before. So maybe that would be a complaint that I would raise against the novel. And then also, I noticed that as you keep reading, as you get to the last third of the novel where you start talking about the dictatorship, the style becomes a little bit heavier. It's like the narration is a little more heavy-handed. Why does that happen? Because you can tell that as we get to that point, it's personal. And I mean literally personal for Isabel Allende. You don't have the quote-unquote objectivity or the the lofty style of the descriptions of the first generations of the 19th century, the early 20th one. So when you get to that last part, you really feel a difference in the style and in the whole narrative approach. This is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying, that's something that you may notice right there. But I'm going to say that I'm really happy that I decided to read it and that I decided to tear up that prejudice, that inherited prejudice, maybe if you want, that I had against it. I really had a lot of fun. I mean, there are some dark parts in this novel, but you know what I'm saying. I really enjoyed the reading experience. And I am definitely going to read more by Isabel Allende. So if you have any suggestions, they are welcome. I can't tell you when I'm going to read her again, because you know how it is with books and with TBRs and all that kind of stuff. But I'm definitely going to read more by her, because I am told that the rest of her work is also very, very good. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. I'm always happy to hear them. Those were my 2 cents on La Casa de los Espíritus, the House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.